Thank you to MoEngage, firstly, for inviting me here to talk to you all today on what I'm sure promises to be a cracking afternoon. The reason I'm here is to share a few insights about what we're seeing in the financial landscape and what the implications are for consumers. Hopefully these insights will help you and they'll be complementary to your own insights and help you turbocharge your own activity and how you personalise activity with consumers. And if all else fails, it means you're going to be stuck listening to my dulcet Northern England tones for the next 10 minutes or so. So let's see how we go. Okay, so before we get stuck in, I thought it might be worthwhile just giving you a couple of minutes on who I am, why I'm here, and who's Canstar. So I'm Sara, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Canstar. I've been there 11 years for my sins, so the business has changed a hell of a lot during that time. And whilst I've been there 11 years, that's nothing compared to Canstar's heritage. So I might just do a quick brand awareness survey whilst I've got you all in the room at the moment. Has everybody heard of Canstar? Just raise your hand if you've seen the logo, you've heard of us. Excellent. This is great news for my brand awareness tracking. Thank you. So I'll give you a whistle-stop tour because we have changed over the 30 years that we've been in business. So we started life as a research and ratings agency, primarily in the financial services. And over time, that's evolved. And now we are a fully fledged, dual-sided marketplace where consumers can come to the site, they can research and they can compare. Now, we have over 2,000 brands on the site and we have over 350 plus categories. And that's between canstar.com.au, which is the finance side of the business, and canstarblue.com.au, where we compare all things consumer, so from energy to telco to appliances to gyms, baby products, you name it. So whether you're in the market for banking, super, insurance, we've probably got it. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we see a hell of a lot of consumers each year, so over 10 million each year. We've also got a lot of content on the site. So between the two sites, we've got about 10,000 articles which help consumers understand more about the world of finance and how can they save more, how can they help improve their financial situation. We've also got a number of tools. So we've got things like calculators, free credit score checkers, energy bill-up lights, and the recently released Canstar app. So it means that we're well placed in terms of being able to share some insights on how consumers are feeling about the cost of living crisis and what they're doing differently. Okay, so how are they feeling? Well, the consumer sentiment is definitely mixed. So, and if you'd asked me 12 months ago, the but improving wouldn't have been there. But in recent times, we've seen more stability, and so people, the mood is starting to take a bit of a positive upswing. But generally, we've got about 2/3 of people that are still feeling like they're on a roller coaster. So whilst I hail from the north of England, I currently reside in Queensland. And on Queensland, we have a lot of theme parks on the Gold Coast. And if you imagine that you're at one of those said theme parks, you're just about to get onto the roller coaster, you're chugging up to the top of that just before the drop. That anxiety that you feel and that thinking in terms of what have I done, why am I on here, that's pretty much how 2/3 of the population are feeling. Now, there is a third, particularly those that aren't mortgage holders, aren't having to pay rent, that are feeling quite differently, and so we'll come to those later. Now, I should just pause before I start on what's going on in terms of that roller coaster experience. I did share this deck, admittedly very late with a colleague this morning, looking for a bit of positive reinforcement on the slides, and she kind of grimaced and said to me, "There's a lot of graphs in there, Sara. There's a lot of detail. It's really showing our research heritage." So I apologise. I'm not expecting you to look in detail at those graphs. All you need to take note of is there's a lot of northeasterly action. And whilst in a business sense, I would normally like to see some northeasterly graphs, typically it tends to mean that business is heading in the right direction. When it comes to inflation, to interest rates, to unemployment, and even things like energy, which aren't on the slide, sadly, it's not a great picture. And so if we just take each one in turn, inflation, so if we're looking at the CPI, it ticked up to 3.8%, I think, in the last result. Now, that is down from the dizzying highs that we saw about 18 months ago, where it was up at 7%. But it's still too high for the RBA in terms of their target of 2 to 3%. So that's not good news. Interest rates, I'm sure, most of us in this room are consumers ourselves. It's been a really wild ride in terms of interest rates. I'm not sure if anybody wants to hazard a guess or knows how many times rates have actually risen since May 2022. Do you have any takers? 13 times since May 2022. And that means it's gone from 0.1 to 4.35 in terms of the cash rate. So that's a hell of a lot of pain for consumers. Also, unemployment rate, whilst it's obviously at very low levels, we are starting to see a bit of a gradual uptick. And energy, well, I won't even get started on energy. So what does all this mean for consumers? Well, at Canstar, we do a lot of surveys, and we actually went out in November 2023. We do an annual consumer pulse survey report. It's now in our 7th year, and we survey about 3,000 consumers, and we ask them a whole host of questions about all things finance, how they're feeling, what their attitudes are, how they're coping with things. And one of the questions we ask them is how they're dealing and what's keeping them up at night. And interestingly, we've seen continual growth in the fact that it's the basics, it's the everyday basics that are actually impacting them and have got them worried. So groceries, yet again, when we did this last November, is the biggest concern for people. That's not to say everything else isn't a worry, and it's not surprising when you consider that groceries, after mortgage repayments and rent, typically your second biggest expense. So what does this mean? Well, we actually also have a cost of living index on the site, which I think has just been updated to the August numbers. What this does is it works out a whole host of costs for household services and bills for a hypothetical family of 4. So it covers like a basket of goods, so your mortgage, your insurance, your streaming, pet insurance, all that kind of stuff. And it works out what the per week cost would be. Now, what we found is for the last couple of years, this has grown quite significantly. So we actually found, you may just have to imagine this. No, here we go. It actually found that in the last year, the per week cost of weekly expenses was up over $150 year on year. So that's a lot of money. That equates to about $8,000 a year. And that was actually down on the difference that we saw between 2022 and 2023, where it's about a $250 jump. So it's no surprise that people are hurting. And so particularly the group that are feeling it most are mortgage holders, particularly recent purchasers. So mortgage stress is now increasingly real. So we crunched some numbers recently for some media, and a dual income couple with an average loan size that took out a loan a couple of years ago with a rate of about 2.86%, their repayments as a proportion of their income would have equated to about 30%. When you fast forward to current day and you look at average rates of about 6.3%, that's now jumped to almost 44%. And one more interest rate rise would actually send that soaring to close to 45%. That's a massive proportion of income that people are paying. So clearly that is a big concern for people. Like keeping you in surprise every time. So what are consumers doing about it? Well, consumers are telling us that to cope with rising rates, they're considering selling things. So almost half of the people we surveyed told us that they were actually considering selling something, given rising rates. And almost half again of those that said they were considering selling actually did. Now, a bit misleading with the title. It's not actually that they've necessarily sold property. Typically, the biggest thing that they've actually sold is furniture, appliances, those kind of goods. But we are increasingly seeing a number of people that are actually relocating or downsizing, and that's actually growing year on year. And I'm not just going to labour the point on mortgages. Everything, as you saw with the cost of living stuff, has actually gone up. So I'm sure, like me, you've received a car insurance renewal recently and had to do a double take. They have gone up massively in the last year, 30% is kind of the average. More so if you're living in Victoria, it's not a good place to be. We're looking at about 40%. Bit better here in New South Wales, we're looking at 20%. Obviously this varies, I should mention, compliance would kill me if I didn't. This is all based on, very standard comprehensive car insurance, certain makes and models, etc. But you can find all the detail on the Canstar website. But again, it just goes to the point that it's not just mortgages, it's insurance, it's energy. There's a whole host of stuff that's contributing to how people are feeling right now. And with inflation rising, the other key issue is salaries and what's happening there. So we crunched some numbers recently and we found that to actually keep pace with inflation, you would have needed close to a $4,000 pay rise this year. And I don't know about you, but there's not an awful lot of pay rises going around at the moment. So again, another challenge. So what does all this mean? Well, it basically means that the savings that people had built up a bit of a buffer during the pandemic, where we found that people were saving more, they were paying down the bad debt, they were paying off personal loans, they were paying off credit cards, they were actually putting a fair bit away. So back in November 2021, people told us on average they were saving about $671 a month. That has now dropped in the last survey we did to $316. And pretty much half the people we surveyed, unsurprisingly, have told us that they're saving less right now. But you'll be pleased to know, because I have realised going through this, it's sounding like the voice of doom and gloom, that we are turning a corner. There is some good news now coming through. So in general, we've got a large proportion of consumers that are feeling that they're living within their means. And we are starting to see signs that consumer confidence is lifting. And that is because things are starting to stabilise across the market. And it's also because people are taking action. So we also look at, both in terms of our own stats and what we're seeing in terms of people coming to the site, comparing, actually switching, and also when we're actually surveying them, we see that there's 28% of consumers that have switched, and there's another 32% of consumers that are telling us they are going to switch. Now, this is particularly prevalent in those categories where they see it as a much more lower commitment thing. So where they see it's going to be much easier to do. So things like insurance, phone bills, gas, all that kind of stuff is where we're really seeing the switching take place. And there are some deals to be had. So on that cost of living index that I mentioned just a few slides ago, where we talk about the weekly household repayments that people are in to shell out, we do also compare to what the savings would be if you actually switched to the lowest 5-star Canstar rated product, or in some cases, if it's a savings, the highest rated 5-star product. And what we've found, I've only used 4 here, but there's a lot more when you go onto the site. You could actually be saving a fair bit. So consumers could actually be saving $300 if they actually switch the home line from the current average to the lowest 5-star. Energy, it's a similar amount. Car insurance, because we've seen the premium increases, you could actually be looking at up to $700. And savings, it's $500 a year. So I would really encourage you as consumers to go out, do your own comparison, do your own research, because there's probably savings to be had as well. And so consumers are taking action. They are cutting their expenses. We've seen that. All the usual things that you would expect them to be doing in terms of takeaways, coffees, reviewing the streaming services. Alcohol-free seems to be a big one that we're seeing come up on a lot of the surveys. Not one I've particularly tried, but it seems to be very popular. And it was interesting. We actually had a Canstar group team day yesterday. We've got a number of money experts that work for the group. So we've got Effie Zahas, who's one of our Canstar ambassadors. We've got Steve Mickenbecker, Sally Tyndall. And they all ran workshops, and we shared ideas amongst the staff in terms of the ways people were saving money. And there are so many these days, particularly in the grocery space. So there's actually a lot people are doing. And we're seeing that in terms of the stories that the people are reading on the site. Anything to do with ways to save $1,000, ways to make $10,000. That's the kind of content that people are eating up. But they haven't given up on little luxuries. So I did ask Christine, who's our editor at Canstar Blues, the consumer side of the business. They have a lot more fun insights than us and a few more nuggets on all sorts of different verticals. And what she shared with me is that people are going to ice cream as their go-to these days. We've seen a big spike in light of the cost of living crisis. We've seen that people are still using food delivery services. That's still a little treat that people are going for. Spending at beauty retailers, we've actually seen that go up. People are definitely going for that. Interesting one that we added here was toilet rolls. So we actually do rate toilet rolls on Canstar Blue. And it's surprising to think post-pandemic I would be talking about toilet rolls again, but here we are. And we've actually seen massive engagement in terms of people willing to pay a bit extra for softness, for the satisfaction for toilet rolls. So it shows little luxuries go a long way. On the flip side though, the strategic spending is up. People are looking at things where they can make a real difference. So insurances, goes without saying, I've covered that we're seeing a big growth in that category. We're also seeing consumer behaviour change in terms of they're actually spending longer on the site, they're using more filters, they're coming back more often. So they're really thinking about some of the purchases and what they're doing. We're also seeing that they're willing to spend money to save money. So there's been a big uptake in solar because people obviously were very concerned with energy bills. They see this as a way, an initial outlay, they can get some money back. And interestingly, more recently, particularly with what's happened with property prices and particularly in the eastern states, we've seen the younger demographic particularly interested in the investment content and ETFs as a way of building wealth. I touched on this a little bit, but we've got lots of great data from both the Canstar and the Canstar Blue site, just in terms of what people are reading. Typically, it's not really changed that much in the last 12 months. So anything to do with rates, when will interest rates go down, what's the interest rate forecast, anything to do with property, best suburbs to buy, best places to go on holiday, how do I switch my super, how much super do I need? That's all the kind of content that consumers are interested in right now. And I'll just come back to where I started at the beginning in terms of those that aren't on the roller coaster, those that aren't feeling it as much. What we're seeing from that particular cohort is a big increase in the travel-related categories. We're seeing a big uptick in travel insurance and any kind of associated products. And it's interesting when you look at some of the top destinations that we're getting out of our selectors, that we've got some very affordable type of holiday destinations with Europe and USA thrown in there as well. It's like I'm pausing for effect every time I hit this clicker. Okay, so if I can leave you with 5 key things to think about as you go through the afternoon, as you go back to the workplace. I guess the first one is know your customer. So hopefully what these slides have shown you is that the way people are feeling is different depending on their situation. It's not just demo related. It's impacting everybody differently, whether they're a mortgage holder, depending on life stage. It's really important to think about what's the money mindset and the attitude, as well as all the other stuff. The other thing to bear in mind is that people are really researching a lot more. They're taking a lot more time. So in terms of the comms that you're putting together and the personalisation, we need to take that into account. We need to show them the value and give them even more reasons to connect. We're also finding that people are still looking for value. So at Canstar, our ratings are value-based. So, for example, health insurance, we take into account price and features. So that means we could have a 5-star product that is fully featured, which is more expensive. And we are finding that people are still going for those products. So they're not necessarily just picking the cheapest. They are still looking for value. So important to remember. And then my final point, and a bit of a shameless plug, is to encourage you to test yourself in terms of money matters. We do have a Test Your Money IQ quiz. I think it's a 21-question quiz where you can test yourself on some just basic, simple questions on all sorts of household finances, credit cards, insurances, etc. So it's a really good starting point to get a gauge of where you are, and then some simple steps that you can take to improve your own situation. And that is it from me.